The receipt was for a cabin in Muskoka, paid in full, 3 nights, and my brother-in-law's name was on it as the second guest. I found it folded inside my wife's winter coat pocket while I was looking for her car keys, because she'd left them somewhere again, and we were already running late for her ultrasound appointment. I almost didn't open it. I almost just shoved it back where it came from and grabbed the keys and forgot about it. The way you forget about a receipt for gas or groceries. But something about the date stopped me. 6 weeks before she told me she was pregnant. I stood in our front hallway in Barrie, Ontario, in February, with my coat half on and the car running outside in the cold, and I read that piece of paper 4 times like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened, but I'll tell you anyway. Nathan Hollis. 36. I'd spent the last 11 years working my way up at a logistics company that moved freight between Ontario and the Maritimes, the kind of job where you learn patience. Because trucks break down, and weather doesn't care about your deadlines. I was good at my job, because I was good at staying calm when everything around me was falling apart. That skill would get tested in ways I never expected. That night, after the ultrasound, after we'd seen the gray smudge on the screen, that the technician said was measuring right on schedule, my mother called me. She never calls just to talk. She called because she had something to manage. Nathan, she said, in that voice she uses when she's already decided something and just needs you to agree with her. Whatever happens with you and Rachel, that baby is going to need a father. You understand that, right? I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and felt something go cold in my chest, because there was no reason for her to say that. Nothing had happened yet, nothing I knew about. But she said it like she was preparing me for a conversation we hadn't had, like she already knew the ending of a book I hadn't started reading. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Rachel, who slept the way she always did, on her side with one hand tucked under the pillow, breathing slow and even. And I stared at the ceiling and thought about every small thing that had felt slightly wrong over the past few months, and I'd talked myself out of noticing. I should back up. I grew up the second of 2 boys in a house in Orillia where my older brother Marcus got the benefit of every doubt anyone could invent for him. Marcus was the kind of person teachers described as charismatic on report cards, when what they meant was that he didn't do the work, but somehow still ended up fine. When Marcus totaled my dad's truck the week he got his license, my father said boys do dumb things sometimes. When Marcus got 2 girls pregnant in the same calendar year back in his 20s, different stories, different outcomes. One a quiet arrangement nobody talked about. My mother said he was young and figuring himself out. When I missed my father's retirement dinner because I was stuck on a logistics call, rerouting 3 trucks around a closed highway, my mother told my aunt I'd become distant. That was the family economy. Marcus spent freely and never paid the bill. I paid every bill that came through the door, including the ones that weren't mine. But this isn't really about Marcus. Marcus wasn't who Rachel slept with. That's the part that made it worse, in a way, because at least with Marcus I would have had a script. I'd seen my mother defend him my whole life. I knew what that looked like. This was my best friend. Owen. That's what I'll call him. Though by the time this all happened I'd stopped calling him anything. Had been my closest friend since we were 19, working summers together loading delivery trucks, before either of us had real jobs. He was Rachel's friend before he was mine, actually. He introduced us at a barbecue 11 years ago. Stood there grinning like a matchmaker, told her I was boring in the best way. The kind of boring that pays its bills on time. We all laughed. He was the best man at our wedding. He gave a toast that made my aunt cry. He'd been over for dinner at our house, probably 200 times in the years since. My parents loved him more than they loved some of our actual cousins. He had a key to our place for emergencies, watered our plants when we went to PEI for our anniversary, fixed Rachel's car battery in our driveway in the rain because I was on a work call and couldn't get away. He fixed a lot of things in our driveway apparently. The receipt sat in my coat pocket for 3 days before I said anything. I want to be honest about that, because there's a version of this story where I confront her the second I find it, dramatic and immediate, but that's not what happened. What happened is I went quiet. I went to work. I made dinner. I asked how she was feeling, whether the nausea had let up, whether she wanted me to pick up the prenatal vitamins from the pharmacy on Bayfield Street. I watched her across our kitchen table and tried to find the version of her face that hadn't done this. And I couldn't, because I didn't know yet whether she had. I only had a receipt. I told myself there were explanations. Owen could have booked a cabin for a work retreat. Rachel could have left her old coat with him to return something. And the receipt got mixed in. I built an entire alternate reality out of a single piece of paper, because the real one was unbearable. What broke the dam was small. Stupid, almost. We were watching television. Some renovation show she liked. And a commercial came on for a cottage rental company, the kind with a loon calling in the background. And Rachel went very still, and then got up too quickly and said she needed water. I watched her leave the room and felt the floor of my life tilt sideways. I followed her into the kitchen. She had her back to me, gripping the edge of the counter. Rachel. She didn't turn around. I found the receipt, I said. Muskoka. 3 nights. Owen's name on it as the second guest. She turned around so slowly it was like watching someone underwater. Her face had already given her away before she said a word. The way guilt rearranges a person's features into something you've never seen on them before, something that doesn't belong to the person you married. It's not what you think, she said, and I almost laughed because that's the sentence. That's the sentence every person says right before they confirm. It's exactly what you think. Then, tell me what it is. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the floor. The silence went on long enough that I sat down at our kitchen table, because my legs had started to feel like they belonged to someone else. How long, I said. Not a question. I didn't have the energy to put a question mark on it. She started crying, which I understood later was not an answer but a delay tactic. A way to buy a few more seconds before the next thing had to be said out loud. 8 months, she finally said. 8 months, the baby was due in 5. I asked the only question that mattered, the one I'd been avoiding, since I read that receipt in our front hallway with my coat half on. Is it his? She didn't say no. That was the thing. If she'd said no with any confidence at all, I think some animal part of me would have believed her, would have wanted to believe her so badly that I'd have let the doubt go. But she said, I don't know. And those 3 words did something to me that the 8 months hadn't. The affair was a wound. I don't know was the wound getting infected. I want to tell you I left that night, walked out into the cold and never looked back. Something clean and decisive, I didn't. I sat at that table until almost 3 in the morning, while she cried and explained and contradicted herself and cried again, telling me it had started after a rough patch when I'd been working 60-hour weeks covering for a coworker on leave. Telling me Owen had been there, had listened, had made her feel like she existed as more than someone waiting at home. Every sentence was a small blade. Owen listened. Owen noticed. Owen was my best friend had spent over a decade being the fun uncle, the best man, the guy with the key to our house. And the entire time some part of him had apparently been keeping inventory of what wasn't his. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning I packed a bag and drove to my cousin Greta's place in Midland, because I needed somewhere that wasn't my own kitchen and wasn't my parents' house. Somewhere I could think without an audience. That's when I found out my mother already knew. It came out almost by accident. In a phone call with Rachel, 2 days later, where she was trying, badly, to explain why she hadn't told me sooner. Your mom said we should wait until we were sure, she said, and I had to ask her to repeat it because I genuinely thought I'd misheard. My mother knew? Silence on the line told me everything. Before Rachel managed to say, she's known for almost a month. A month. My mother had sat across from me at Sunday dinner 3 weeks earlier, had asked me whether we'd picked out a crib yet, had told Rachel to put her feet up and let me get her tea. All while knowing that the baby growing inside my wife might belong to the man who'd stood next to me at my own wedding. She had looked me in the eye and talked about nursery paint colors with that information sitting in her like a stone. Why? I said. It wasn't really a question. I didn't think there was an answer that would make sense of it. She said if you found out too early, you'd do something rash. She wanted to wait until. Rachel stopped. Until what? Until the baby was born. She said once you held him, it wouldn't matter anymore who the father was. She said you'd love him anyway. And none of this would matter. I hung up the phone, and sat on the edge of Greta's guest bed, and felt something in me go very cold and very clear, the way water gets right before it freezes. My mother hadn't been hoping the situation would resolve itself. She'd had a plan. The plan was me. The next morning I drove to my parents' place in Aurelia. Owen's car was in the driveway, which told me everything before I even opened the door. The golden boy had run home to the family that would protect him, exactly the way Marcus always had. Except this time it wasn't Marcus. My mother opened the door already looking apologetic. Which confirmed Rachel had called ahead to warn her I knew. My father stood behind her in the front hall in his housecoat, holding a coffee mug like it might shield him from whatever was coming. Owen was sitting at their kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten probably 1,000 meals as a kid, like he had every right to still be welcome there. I didn't yell. I want that on the record. Because afterward my mother told people I'd lost control, and that was a lie she needed to make the story easier for her to live inside. I walked into that kitchen, and looked at the man who'd been my best friend since we were teenagers and said, "Get out of my parents' house." He had the nerve to look wounded. "Nathan, can we just talk about this like adults? You don't get to use that word. Adults don't sleep with their best friend's pregnant wife, and then sit at the family table, waiting for breakfast." My mother stepped between us, hands raised like she was trying to defuse something. "Nathan, please. Sit down. We need to talk about the baby." "There it is," I said, "not about Rachel. Not about Owen. Not about the fact that you knew, and let me walk around for a month not knowing my own life had already ended. Straight to the baby. The baby is innocent, my mother said, her voice climbing into that register she used, when she'd already decided she was right, and just needed everyone else to catch up. Whatever happened between the three of you, that child didn't ask for any of it. I agree, I said. So tell me how that makes it my responsibility. My father finally spoke quiet, the way he always was right before he said something that mattered to him. Family takes care of family, son. Then ask Owen to take care of his own child, I said. He's sitting right there. Owen's face did something complicated, somewhere between anger and panic. It's not even confirmed it's mine, he said, which was, I would later realize, the single most cowardly sentence I'd ever heard a grown man say out loud. You slept with her for 8 months and you're going to sit in my parents' kitchen and pretend you don't know whether you're the father, because admitting it would cost you something. My mother's hand went to her chest like I'd struck her personally. Nathan, biology isn't everything. A real father is the one who shows up. I looked at her and felt something settle in me, cold and absolutely certain. Biology wasn't everything when Marcus needed forgiveness for things he never apologized for. Biology wasn't everything when you needed an excuse for him. But suddenly, when it might mean I have to raise his child, I pointed at Owen, his child, not Marcus's, biology stops mattering. You don't believe that. You're just saying whatever keeps this family from having to look at what he did. Nobody had an answer for that. My father set his coffee mug down very carefully. Like it had become something fragile. I left before I said something I couldn't walk back. The same restraint that had defined my entire life inside that family. The thing that had always made me the reliable one, the one who didn't make scenes, the one everyone assumed didn't have feelings simply because I didn't perform them on command. I called a lawyer 2 days later. Her name was Diane Fortescue. An old colleague's recommendation. A woman with a calm, unhurried voice, who had clearly walked 100 men through exactly this kind of unraveling. Do not sign anything. She told me in our first meeting, in an office on Dunlop Street, that smelled like fresh coffee and old carpet. Do not agree to anything verbally, not even to keep the peace. If Rachel is willing, we get a non-invasive prenatal paternity test done now, not after birth. You deserve to know before you make a single decision. Rachel agreed without much fight. I think by then she was exhausted from carrying a secret that had stopped fitting inside her. We went to a clinic outside Barrie, on a gray Tuesday morning, and in the waiting room she tried to talk to me, tried to apologize in that loose, unencored way people do, when they're more interested in feeling forgiven than in actually being sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. That doesn't help. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that. What you need and what I owe you stopped being connected the day you decided not to tell me, I said, and she didn't say anything else after that. The results came back 9 days later. Diane called me into her office, and I knew from the careful way she folded her hands before speaking that the news wasn't what I'd been quietly hoping for. Probability of paternity, Nathan Hollis, 0.1%. Statistically excluded. I sat with that number for a long time. I thought it would destroy me, and in a way it did. But it also did something I didn't expect. It cleared the fog. For weeks I'd been trapped in somehow possibly suspended in a kind of grief that didn't have permission to fully exist yet, because nothing was confirmed. The number ended that. There was no more room for hope or denial. There was just a fact, clean and brutal, and somehow a fact was easier to carry than the uncertainty had been. I drove home, to the apartment I'd rented above a hardware store on Bayfield, because I hadn't gone back to the house Rachel and I shared, and I sat in my car in the parking lot, and let myself cry properly for the first time since the receipt. Not loud, just enough to admit something had actually died. Then I went upstairs and started making copies of everything. The receipt. Screenshots of texts Rachel had finally forwarded me. The ones where Owen told her I was too wrapped up in work to really see her. The DNA results, and one screenshot Rachel sent almost like an offering. A text from my mother to her, dated the week she'd found out. Don't tell Nathan until we have a plan. He's too logical right now, he'll just shut down and leave. Once the baby's here he'll come around. Too logical. As if calmness was a character flaw that needed to be managed around rather than respected. 2 days later my mother organized what she called a family talk at her house, Sunday dinner, 5 o'clock. The text read, "We need to come together for Rachel and the baby. Not for me. Never once for me." I almost didn't go. Then my uncle Desmond. No. I'm using a different name, doesn't matter. The point is my father's younger brother. The one person in that family who'd never once made excuses for Marcus, and wasn't about to start making them for Owen, called me and said, "Your mother's telling people in town you're abandoning a pregnant woman. I think you should be there to say your piece, and I'll come stand next to you while you say it." So I went. With a folder under my arm, the same way you'd walk into a meeting you knew was going to be hard, but necessary. The dining room hadn't changed since I was. Same table. Same framed photo of all of us at Wasaga Beach from 20 years ago. Same smell of my mother's roast chicken covering up everything underneath it. Rachel sat near the window, pale, hands in her lap. Owen leaned against the counter with his arms crossed like he still believed he had standings in that room. My father stood by the fireplace. My aunt and my uncle sat together near the end of the table, and a cousin of mine had come too. Probably invited as emotional padding. The way my mother liked to stack a room with witnesses she assumed would side with her by default. She started talking before I'd even sat down. Nathan, thank you for coming. We all just want to focus on healing instead of blame. I set the folder on the table. Does everyone here actually know why I moved out? My cousin shifted in her seat. We heard there were problems. Owen said with a straight face. Nathan's having a hard time accepting the situation. And something in me went very still and very calm. The calm before I do the thing I've decided to do. Accepting it, I repeated. Sure, so let's call it that. I opened the folder. First, the receipt. My aunt's hand went to her mouth. Then I laid Rachel's written admission beside it, the one I'd asked her to put in writing through Diane. Not for any legal reason, but because I wanted there to be no more room for, it's not what you think. Then I placed the DNA results in the center of the table. This is the paternity test, I said. I am not the father. The room went silent the way a room goes silent right before something breaks. My mother started crying. Owen's face went the color of the tablecloth. Those tests can be wrong, Owen said, the same cowardly reflex. Non-invasive prenatal test. Chain of custody documentation, I said, sliding another page across. But if you'd like a second opinion after the baby's born, I'm sure my lawyer can arrange that too. I'd actually recommend it. For your own sake. He had nothing to say to that. My mother reached across the table like she could physically pull this conversation back to where she wanted it. Nathan, please. Not in front of everyone. You invited everyone, I said. I didn't. I wanted support. You wanted an audience to pressure me into doing what you'd already decided I should do. My uncle spoke up then, quiet, but it landed harder than anything else said that night. Nathan's right, Mary. That's not my mother's real name either, but you understand. You've spent a month protecting Owen instead of being honest with your own son. That's not love. That's just habit. My mother looked at him like he'd slapped her. Owen muttered, stay out of it, Des, and my uncle said, you slept with your best friend's pregnant wife. You don't get to tell anyone where to stand. My father finally asked, the only useful question anyone had asked me in weeks. Nathan, what do you want? I looked at him and said, that's the first good question anyone in this family has asked me since I found that receipt. I want a divorce. I want my name kept off the birth certificate. I want all contact from Rachel routed through lawyers, unless it's something urgent. I want Owen to stop contacting me entirely. I want this family to stop rewriting what happened into a story where I'm the one being unreasonable. And I am not raising another man's child so that everyone in this room gets to keep pretending. Owen didn't do what he did. My mother whispered, but that baby is innocent. He is, I said, which is exactly why he deserves the truth from the very beginning. Not a fake father standing in for a man who won't show up. Not a family built on everyone being too scared to say Owen's name out loud. I picked up the folder and walked out while my mother called after me. I didn't stop this time. I'd stopped a lot of times in my life when my family called after me. That was the last one. The aftermath moved fast once the dam actually broke. My aunt called that night, apologized for having believed the version of events my mother had been quietly circulating for weeks. My uncle sent one text, proud of you. That was brutal, but you stood straight through it. I still have that message saved. Owen's fiancée. They'd gotten engaged the year before, a fact that had somehow not stopped any of this. Found out within days and left him. Apparently she'd believed he was going through something with his best friend, not fathering a child with that friend's wife. My mother sent a wall of texts over the following week. You've embarrassed this family. Your father is devastated. Owen is in a dark place. Rachel can't eat. Think about the baby, Nathan. Think about the baby. The last one read, this isn't the son I raised. Abandoning a child like this. I replied once. I'm exactly the son you raised. I'm the one who finally stopped covering for the people you protect instead of me. Then I blocked her number. The divorce went through quieter than I expected, mostly because Rachel didn't fight much of anything. I think some part of her understood there wasn't a version of this worth fighting for anymore. She moved in with her sister in Bracebridge. Owen, notably, did not move in with her. That told me more about the kind of father he intended to be than any conversation could have. About 6 weeks after the DNA results, Rachel asked to meet at a coffee shop on Dunlop Street. I almost said no. Diane told me closure could be worth something as long as I kept my checkbook and my heart in separate pockets, so I went. She looked smaller than I remembered her being, not physically, just stripped of whatever confidence I'd fallen in love with 11 years earlier. Owen doesn't want to be involved, she said, staring at her cup. I'm shocked, said. She flinched. I deserve that. No, you deserve honesty. Sarcasm's just what I've got left on short notice. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said quieter. I let him make me feel like you didn't care anymore. And I used that as an excuse instead of just talking to you. It was the first thing she'd said in this entire ordeal that sounded like actual ownership, instead of an explanation, dressed up as an apology. I appreciated it. It didn't change anything. I hope you become a better mother than you were a wife, I told her, and her face crumpled, but she nodded, and said she hoped so too. The baby was born in late spring. A girl. Rachel named her Maple, which struck me as almost too on the nose for an Ontario baby, but it suited her when I eventually saw the photo. Rachel sent it through her sister, 2 days after the birth, with one line. She's healthy. I thought you should know. I looked at that photo for a long time. Small, red-faced, wrapped in a hospital blanket, with a little knit hat. Innocent because of course she was. That was the hardest part of the whole thing. My anger had clear targets everywhere else. Rachel, Owen, my mother, but never her. I never once felt anything toward that baby except a strange distant sadness. That every adult who should have protected her had already failed her before she took a single breath. My mother, in one final attempt, sent me that same photo a few days later with the caption, "Look at her and tell me you feel nothing." I wrote back, "I feel sad that every adult around her failed her before she was even born. That doesn't make me her father." Then I blocked that number too, the new one she'd used to get around, the first block. My father showed up at my apartment about 4 months after the divorce was finalized. I almost didn't open the door. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, like the silence he usually filled every room with had finally caught up to him physically. "Can we talk?" he said. "Owen's not here," I said. "So I guess you can say whatever you actually mean for once." He winced, but he stayed standing in my doorway. "Your mother and I are separated," he said, which surprised me enough that I didn't say anything back right away. "She still thinks if we all just sit down together, this can be repaired. Can it?" He looked at the floor of my hallway for a long moment. "I don't know. Honestly, I don't know." It was the most honest sentence I think I'd ever heard him say. "I failed you," he said next. "I kept thinking if I protected the people who made messes, the family would stay together. All it ever taught anyone was that there'd always be someone else around to clean it up." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because the baby's here and Owen still hasn't shown up. Your mother's exhausted. Rachel's mostly on her own. And I finally understood, we weren't asking you to step up because that baby needed you. We were asking because Owen wouldn't." There it was, late but real. "I'm not coming back," I told him. "I know. I'm not meeting her to make anyone in this family feel better about themselves." "I know that too," he said, and for just a second he looked like he might actually cry, which I'd never once seen in my life. He didn't. "I'm my father's son in that particular way, whatever else separates us." "I'm sorry, Nathan," he said. "I believe you," I told him. Then, after a pause, "I just don't trust you yet." He nodded like that was a fair price, and it was. My mother never managed that kind of honesty. She kept sending things. Cards, an old photo of me and Marcus as kids at a hockey rink, a long letter about how she only ever wanted her boys to be a family again, as if Owen and I were two equally innocent casualties of some storm nobody had caused. I sent every package back unopened, not out of cruelty, just survival. You can only carry so much before you have to start putting things down. Owen eventually moved out west, Alberta somewhere, which felt about right. A new province full of people who hadn't yet heard the highlight reel. Rachel raises Maple mostly on her own, with help from her sister, and, occasionally, my father, who drives up to Bracebridge more than my mother ever does. From what I hear, Owen sends money only when the lawyers force the issue. I went back to therapy. The actual kind. Not the kind you do in your head at 2 in the morning, convincing yourself you're fine. I moved out of the apartment above the hardware store eventually, into a small place closer to the lake. I learned to cook things that didn't come from a box. I started fishing again with my uncle on weekends up near Honey Harbor. Caught almost nothing most trips, which he said was good, because it gave us plenty of time to complain about everything else in our lives instead. I started seeing someone new about a year and a half after the divorce. Carefully, slowly. The first time she asked about my family, I gave her the short version. The receipt, the 8 months, the DNA test, the dinner table. She sat quietly for a second and then said, "That's not really a family tree. That's more of a witness statement." I laughed for the first time in longer than I could remember. Sometimes I still think about Maple, what she'll be told when she's older. Whether Owen will ever become the father my mother insisted she needed. Whether Rachel will tell her the truth before someone else does. I hope she does. Not because I want the girl to carry any of this, but because children always end up sensing the lies built around them, long before anyone has the courage to name them out loud. Some people will probably say I should have stayed. That the baby was innocent, and deserved a father, any father. Even one who wasn't hers by blood. They'd be right about one thing. She was innocent, but her innocence was never the thing that made any of this my responsibility. My family wanted me to believe that showing up was the same as being asked. It wasn't. They needed someone to clean up what Owen wouldn't. And for 36 years that someone had always, automatically, been me. It just wasn't going to be me anymore.